Picture a man standing on a busy street corner, arguing with ghosts that only he can see. People pass by and whisper that he's crazy. But none of them know the story that led him here. Because no one goes crazy in a vacuum. There's always a brutal past behind the breakdown. There was a boy once, Zach. He wasn't born broken. He wasn't born angry or lost. No, he started off the same as any child. A little boy with wonder in his eyes, always asking why and dreaming in bright colors. But the world around him didn't care about that bright-eyed boy, not in the way he needed. His father would come home late, loud and full of rage. His mother would disappear into silence, retreating into herself. In that house, every day felt like a minefield. Zach learned to tiptoe through the halls, memorizing every creak in the floorboards like it was a landmine. The dinner table was a war zone where words were thrown like knives, and no one ever said sorry. Strangely, it wasn't just the yelling and fear that hurt Zach the most. It was the silence afterward. Everyone pretended nothing was wrong. Forced smiles in public, never a word about the chaos at home. No one ever said, "Hey, something's wrong here." That denial of reality, that gaslighting, became the real poison. You see, the human mind is resilient, but it's not invincible. Trauma doesn't just live in memories, it lives in the body. It warps the nervous system and rewires how a person sees the world, others, and worst of all, themselves. Trauma taught that little boy he was not safe, not worthy, not even real. And as he grew up, the mask grew with him. Zach learned to read people and shapeshift into whatever they needed him to be. He became charming, even funny, a master at pretending everything was fine. Yet underneath that perfect mask, he felt empty and hollow, like a room abandoned after a fire. The walls were still standing, but the soul that once filled it was gone. That's what unprocessed trauma does. It splits the self. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." Zach inherited that tragedy, not just in his genes, but in the silence and emotional neglect passed down to him. Zach didn't go crazy in a flash. It started quietly. First, the insomnia, that gnawing sense that something was always wrong even when everything seemed fine. Then came the paranoia, the simmering rage, the creeping self-hatred. He found himself unable to trust anyone, not even himself. Every relationship felt like a minefield. He'd push people away, then beg them to stay. Love became a battlefield where he was both the soldier and the saboteur. He even tried therapy once. He told the therapist he couldn't feel anything anymore, that his dreams made no sense, that sometimes he'd look in the mirror and not recognize the man staring back. They called it anxiety and depression. But those labels couldn't touch the real monster. The buried pain he never spoke of. When trauma is ignored, it doesn't disappear. It hides, it festers, it waits. And one day it comes out, maybe as a breakdown, maybe as an addiction, maybe in the sudden silence of someone who used to laugh the loudest. Sure enough, Zach began talking to himself. Not just the odd mutter, but full-on conversations and arguments with invisible ghosts. He'd pace for hours and scream at the walls when no one was watching. He would walk past mirrors without even glancing at his own reflection. He even carried a notebook everywhere, scribbling down thoughts that made sense to no one else. His friends whispered that Zach had changed, that something about him was suddenly different. But the truth is, he had always been like this. He just ran out of energy to hide it anymore. And that's something no one tells you about going crazy. It's not a sudden madness, it's exhaustion. It's the soul finally giving up on the charade of being okay. Spend your whole life suppressing your wounds and fears, and eventually your psyche starts to crack. The human mind isn't a machine. It's a fragile tapestry of memories, emotions, beliefs, and meaning. And when too much of that tapestry is soaked in pain and silence, it begins to tear apart. In an attempt to make sense of the chaos, Zach's mind began seeing patterns that weren't really there. He became convinced the universe was speaking to him directly, literally. Every radio ad held a secret message just for him. Every stranger's glance was a coded clue. Every flicker of light in a hallway signaled something cosmic. What was really happening? His mind, starved for order, was creating meaning out of chaos. It was desperately trying to impose sense on the senseless, to make meaning of pain that had never been acknowledged. That's the cruel trick of unresolved trauma. It never lets you rest. It never lets you forget. It disguises itself as anxiety, as anger, sometimes even as mystical insight. But behind all of those facades is really a child's voice, screaming from the dark, "Please notice me. Save me. Help me." By the time that inner child's screams took over, it seemed too late. The world doesn't understand madness. It fears it. It turns a suffering soul into a spectacle. And Zach, like so many others, became just another cautionary tale, another statistic, another whispered story about what went wrong. He didn't go crazy because he was weak. He went crazy because he had been strong for too long. Some might call what happened to him madness. But Carl Jung had another word for it: individuation, the painful process of becoming whole by facing the darkest parts of yourself. Of course, none of it felt like some noble journey to wholeness while it was happening. For Zach, it felt like drowning, like being pulled into an ancient abyss with no bottom. It felt like a nightmare where nothing spoke in words, only in symbols and jagged fragments of memory behind closed doors. Here's the truth. You don't just lose your mind in one sudden moment. It cracks slowly, like a tiny fracture spreading across glass over years of pressure. People on the outside said, "He just snapped," but they didn't see what led up to it. The quiet nights filled with silent despair, the countless moments he suffered alone, all those unseen cracks were spiderwebbing through his life long before the breaking point. Because when you bury the past, you don't kill it, you multiply it. Unhealed trauma becomes a ghost, and ghosts don't die. They haunt. Zach wasn't just wrestling with bad memories. He was carrying the weight of an entire childhood of confusion, shame, and unspoken grief. Every time he'd swallowed his pain as a child, that pain waited and then screamed back at him as an adult. This is where the line between sanity and insanity truly begins to blur. Psychologists talk about the false self, a version of you created just to survive. It wears whatever mask it needs to, tells people what they want to hear, and buries the truth so deep that even you forget it's there. But that buried truth doesn't forget you. One day the mask starts to crack under its own weight. The persona you built to please the world can't hold itself together anymore. And when that mask finally shatters, what's left is the shadow. The side of himself Zach never wanted to face. The rage he swore wasn't his. The grief he refused to acknowledge. The inner voice that whispered, "You were never loved the way you needed to be." This raw chaos is what going crazy really is. It's not an illness. It's not demonic possession. It's not even irrational once you understand it. It's a psyche breaking under the weight of too much pretending. Madness is the soul's protest. It's the final, feral scream of a mind that has been forced to silence itself for too long. And in a strange way, a breakdown can become a breakthrough. Because when everything collapses, when all the lies fall away and the mask is in pieces, you're left with the one thing that can save you: the truth. But that truth is not pretty. Zach's truth was this: he had been abused, he had been neglected, He had never been truly seen for who he was. For years he told himself that none of that mattered, that he was fine. But it did matter. It always mattered. Carl Jung believed that healing begins when the unconscious is made conscious. In other words, the act of bringing your darkness into the light, of facing what you've hidden, is the beginning of redemption. But here's the hard part. Facing your past means feeling everything you worked so hard to bury. And that's terrifying. Because beneath the numbness and the chaos is something even scarier. Vulnerability. To go into your shadow, you have to become soft again. You have to grieve. And grief, in its own way, is a kind of death. Eventually, Zach tried therapy again. But this time, he made no effort to perform or impress. He didn't try to be the wise, enlightened patient. He didn't try to be in control at all. He just wept. He wept for the little boy who had to grow up too fast. He wept for the man who never truly felt safe. He even wept for the madness itself. Because once he stopped running from it, he could finally see that his crazy reaction had been the only sane response to an insane situation. He wasn't magically cured, but he wasn't lost anymore either. Zach began to understand that his madness was never really his enemy. It was a message, a cry for help from the parts of himself that had been locked away. And when he finally listened, when he opened that locked door, those wounded parts of him didn't try to destroy him. They just wanted to be acknowledged. In a way, they thanked him, because now he was finally listening. If you've ever felt like you're losing your mind, if the world feels too loud and you feel broken beyond repair, listen to me. You are not broken. You are buried. And healing isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the pain made you forget. So how do you begin to unbury yourself? Start with silence. Not the numb silence of isolation, but a living, mindful quiet where you can finally hear your own thoughts. Let yourself express whatever surfaces. Write in a journal. Scream into a pillow. Walk alone for miles. Cry in the dark if you need to. Whatever it takes to let the pain move through you. Do it consciously and do it without shame, and seek out wisdom beyond your own head. Read the kind of books that dive deeper than surface wounds. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert A. Johnson. The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller. Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. They won't hand you easy answers, but they'll help you ask the real questions and show you that you're not alone. Above all, don't try to heal just to be normal or perfect. Do it to be real, so you can look in the mirror and finally recognize yourself. The world doesn't need more masks. It needs people who have walked through their own darkness and emerged on the other side honest, open, and whole. It needs people who, like Zach, have faced their shadow and come back with their truth. It needs people like you.